Welcome to the Booktopia podcast. I'm Olivia Fricot, Senior Content Producer and Editor of the Booktopian blog. Joining me today is Ben Hunter, our Fiction Category Manager. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Olivia.
We have Joe Lewin, our Head of Trade Product. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Liv.
And finally, we have our Campaigns Coordinator, Ashleigh Berry. Welcome, Ash.
Hey.
So around 7 a.m. this morning, Sydney time, the winner of the 2020 Booker Prize was announced to the world. Scottish-American author Douglas Stuart has won the prize for his novel Shuggie, Bain, which is set in Glasgow in 1981, and it follows a woman who's struggling with addiction, and it's all about her relationship with her children, in particular the titular Shuggie, Bain. So I don't know if you guys recall, but in our previous Booker podcasts, we went all in for some very different authors. We were picking Brandon Taylor for Real Life and Tsitsi Dangaremga for not Nervous Conditions. What was it? This Mournable Body.
This Mournable Body.
Yeah, sorry. Turns out that we were all completely wrong. So first of all, do we like Shuggie, Bain? And
I would like to clarify and say that I was rooting for Shuggie all along, but I didn't think that he would win, because I guess I didn't think that they would have the courage to choose a white man. It's been a while since a white man has won the Booker, and yes, this book champions the working class, and it's about a very specific group in society. But I guess I was just second guessing how political the decision making might be. But the judges were really, really clear in their statement that they just they tried to put all of that aside and focus on the books and focus on the works that they were actually judging. And this was the book that they landed on, apparently in like an hour and unanimously. So
that's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool, hey? Whereas obviously last year when there was a tie, there were maybe perhaps some heated words about who should win. Apparently this year it was cut and dry.
It's a nice change and a bit of a stuff you to everyone that was like, oh, the shortlist was just picked politically because they wanted non-white people on it. It's nice to say, well, look, they had such a racially diverse shortlist on a book based on the merit of the book too. You can have diversity in your, within the prize as well as literary merit, which is nice to see.
Yeah, I think the really exciting and interesting thing for our winner is that it's a debut novel. And it's one of a short list of many debut novels, which is a big contrast to last year's prize. Two very, very solidly founded lifelong career authors taking out the joint prize. This year it went to a debut, and I think I can't remember the last time it went to a debut.
Yeah, I think that's really, really exciting for debut authors everywhere. And it really, to me, speaks to how democratic the judging process obviously is, because we saw some really heavy hitters in the long list, particularly Hilary Mantel, Colin McCann, and Tyler. But, when you strip away the canon of work that those authors, deserve all praise for, and just look at the individual books, I think this one's really, really deserving.
Yeah, and not only is it exciting for the prize, it's exciting for readers. It's showing that there's this huge new talent out there. There's so many great new stories to come, and more authors to discover. It's very elating for me.
It is.
Yeah, that's very true. And let's also not forget that the Booker Prize winner takes home £50,000 in prize money. How valuable do we think that would be to a debut author like Douglas Stuart?
I'm going to say very, very. I think he's very happy with that money. I think he'll be taking that check to the bank with a big smile on his face.
And not just the check for the prize itself. But, I mean, as we saw last year with Bernardine Evaristo, even though Bernadine was an established author, her books would generally come out, to some modest critical acclaim, and the sales would be pretty quiet. She shared the prize obviously with Margaret Atwood. The Testaments was a blockbuster from the word go, but Bernadine's novel came out very quietly. Then she won the joint Booker, and that book absolutely took off. And for a whole 12 months up until now, that's been selling. It's been a bestseller for us, and I think everywhere around the world.
Yes.
So how fantastic for Douglas Stuart that he's come out with this debut novel that he apparently spent 10 years writing. It's autobiographical, so all of this heartbreaking stuff that happens in the novel, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later on, that's all drawn from his own life, not unlike our own dearly beloved Trent Dalton when he wrote Boys Follows Universe and really drew from his own childhood and made something beautiful out of that. So he's put all of this work into it. It was released. He expected, Ben and I were talking about this earlier, he expected this book to kind of come out and just, sit around in a few indie bookstores and then fade into the background. And now we're pretty safe to say that it's on track to being a bestseller.
Yeah, that's been something that the shortlistees have consistently been saying in the media is, particularly the debuts, is that it's given their books a chance. In a year when there's no books being sold to readers in bookshops in Europe and North America. It's just it's a dire time to be putting out this precious bit of work, and so for this prize to give a platform to these, particularly the debuts and particularly queer voices and people, authors of color, that's really exciting. That's really huge.
Yeah.
I just want to focus on the Scottishness of this novel because Douglas Stuart is Scottish American. I believe he's only the second Scottish author to ever win this prize after James Kelman in 1994. This seems like such a quintessentially Scottish novel in place but also voice. And it's also been described as like a counterpart to, the privileged Thatcher era London. What really spoke to you guys about this novel in terms of that sense of place and time?
I can't find the quote on the tip of my tongue right now, but there was a fabulous quote. Oh, here it is from Kate Evans from Radio National. She said, "This is a novel you can hear as you read it, heavy with Glasgow accents and extravagant with swearing, cursing, unemployment and useless husbands and lack of food, and a woman who looks at your man the wrong way. It also has a smell of the dregs of beer and last night's grease, poverty and sadness." And I think that really encapsulates the book. Like it really is. There's you have to get used to the dialect that everybody, like the book itself is written in plain English, but the dialogue is all in Scottish language. Glaswegian, yeah. And, you can, like the smell of warm cans of beer kind of seem to impregnate every page. You can taste the fish and chips in your mouth as that, Saturday night treat for Shuggie and his family. It really embodies a time and place and a state of being, of being a child and taking in the culture of that time.
Ash, you've just put a glowing review on our blog for this book. What were your impressions?
Well, firstly, I've just been enjoying listening to you two talk about it. It's been really enjoyable since I spent the whole morning in my thoughts on this book. I definitely agree that for me personally, this book was a huge standout in the shortlist. I'm almost finished the last book of the shortlist. So I can't say for certainty, but yeah, if I had to put my bets on, this would have been a top contender personally. But just on the topic of Scotland and the place and the language, that was personally, such a huge element of this book and what made it what it was. Reading them speaking with that, you know, Scottish inflection or sound, it really helped me to read aloud certain parts to really, I don't know, get into the book. And from there, it was just kind of, you know, clear sailing where I could consume it quite quickly and really, like Joe said, understand the setting, the beer in particular. Yeah, for some reason that hit me when she would be searching for the old warm beer cans around the house. I just immediately could smell that house, and I just knew exactly what that setting was. And then I felt so much more for Shuggie as a character, that he lives in that. And it hit really hard, this book.
One of the things that I've been hearing from the judging panel is these kind of classic phrases of critique and just kind of book selling oomph. Is phrases like impeccable characterization and immaculate sense of place, and I think one of the phrases was the sheer heart of the novel. Was one of the things they said in their feedback. And these all ring bells to me as, you know, all the things that booksellers get behind and lovers of great fiction get behind. Do you guys think that this is going to take off now that it's won this huge prize and it's going to find its way into, you know, stacks in bookshops and into the hands of hundreds of thousands of readers around the world? Is it going to pick up as a popular phenomenon?
I think so. I think it's really... it's hard not to love the characters in particular. I mean, the sense of place is like a kind of anti-tourism, because, you know, the outskirts of Glasgow in the 1980s is not anywhere that you would actually want to go and live. It's colourful for sure, but it's certainly not pleasant. But the characterisation is just, to me, a really fantastic novel is where you can watch these people making these horrible, horrible choices, and you know that you can look at them and say, Agnes in particular, the Shuggie's mother.
Yep.
You look at her and you say, look, she's done some pretty terrible things to her children, but at the same time, you're on her side. You really want her to improve her life, which she strives to do throughout the whole book. She strives so hard to improve her life, but she's struggling against, you know, her own poor choices, her socioeconomic situation, and her addiction to alcohol. And, you know, sometimes she makes really bad choices. Sometimes really bad choices are made for her, but you keep rooting for her all along. It would be a lot easier to write a book where Agnes comes off as a tyrant and a neglectful mother, but it's written with such love that she really comes across as very, very nuanced.
Yeah, and I also think it's significant that it's set like not too far from today. Like I was about to say like 20 years, but it's more like 40. So it's set in the 80s, which, like we were talking earlier about, you know, like what is the value of a book like this set in such in the, like the slums of Glasgow in the 80s? What's the value of that sounds awful, like, you know, what's the value of a book like that to a contemporary reader? But why do you think that contemporary readers are latching onto this book in this way? Like, what is it? How is it speaking to us? What is it saying?
Well, I think that the setting of Glasgow in the 80s is perfect because it's real. It's real to Douglas's lived experience, you know, and as someone who was alive in the 80s, thank you very much for pointing out, Olivia, how long ago that was.
I'm sorry.
You know, it was a different time, but at the same time, not such a different time. You know, like we've had a period of such prosperity since the 80s. You know, Thatcher Britain seems like such a harsh environment. But then when you look at Trump America and Trump/Biden America at the moment, you're seeing similar patterns of you know, rich and poor divide, of political unrest, of, you know, fighting in the streets. That I think it's timely to look back at the 80s.
Yeah, we're really not that far from it, are we? We have all these new
No.
gizmos, and our cars have more airbags, but that's about it.
Yeah.
I think the core themes in this is the addiction, the poverty, the kind of trying to make ends meet when you've got kids and a family, and unemployment is your life is just rife now. We're currently seeing really high unemployment levels. What will people turn to if they can't, put food on the table? And
That's right.
yeah, we see those core themes just everlasting. So that's the
Yeah,
value I'd say to now.
it's interesting thinking about that philosophy of Thatcherism and an attitude to poverty, which I think is very prevalent and gets under people's skin, and they subscribe to it without even realizing this attitude that poverty is a moral issue, that someone's inability to have personal wealth is a moral failing. And as you were alluding to earlier, Joe, it would be a very easy story to write a mother who is totally morally corrupt for not being able to provide for her son. But of course, Douglas has lived that life, and he's had that experience, and he knows the true nuance of it, and he knows the reality. And everyone I know who's grown up in poverty has that nuanced experience, and it's so traumatizing to think about, but it's so much more than that classic breakdown that we have, that it's somehow just a moral failing to be poor in and of itself.
And so I think a really important book for people to read, people who perhaps haven't grown up in poverty, haven't experienced poverty, and haven't known people who've grown up in poverty. It's easy to think, unemployed alcoholic mothers are bad people. But when you read a book like this, you start to realize that, the choices that they make are not always choices. A lot of the time they're made from having never had any other role model, never having any other example to strive to, and just doing the best with the tools that they're given by the society they live in. So I think it can help us all be more compassionate to people who have different opportunities to us.
Yeah, when you think about it that way, it's remarkably not even that different from Mantell's Cromwell.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone's just trying to get by,
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm interested, Ash, in the last line of your review. You said it's a story that needed to be told and one that I needed to read. But there's always this idea that, yeah, sorry, you go.
No, I was going to say that's kind of been my whole pitch since I've read this book. The way I've kind of sum up how I feel about it is I don't really gravitate towards historical fiction or, this kind of fiction. So to me,
You're talking
I loved
about
it.
my childhood, Ash. Thank you very much.
No, it's technically historical fiction. I didn't know much about this 80s, in Scotland, and about the struggles. I've heard of it, but this was such a wake up to that. And even though, yes, it's technically historical fiction, like we said, it's not that far away. So it's one that needed to be told for people now to understand what current people have gone through and what our recent histories are, to kind of understand, our future and our present. And where I sit on that is I needed to read it just personally. Like I said, I don't gravitate towards this niche genre, and I feel it's different after reading it now. I've learned things I probably needed to. I've read about a life I will never experience, but I needed to be aware of. And I think, like we said, it kind of instills that compassion to understand this is a fiction, but it's based on, real things that happened, and real people went through this. And it's kind of, that's what I took away from it. It's like I needed to read this to now have this deeper understanding of just the world I live in and the people I could pass. You know, this was just one country in that era, but I doubt it was the only place experiencing these situations. So keeping that in mind, that's kind of how I sum it up. I needed to read this book, and it's a story that needed to be told.
And I think another interesting and a really interesting perspective, Ash, you know, it was only 40 years ago, but people's attitudes towards mental illness and addiction were so different. And I'm not saying that our current society has a perfect attitude towards mental illness and addiction. There's still a lot of stigma out there. But, you know, you look at the lives of these people and there is no, there's no support. There's nothing there. You know, like Agnes joins a 12-step program, I think at one stage, does she? But, you know, she's very isolated. There's very little assistance out there for her to turn her life around, and her peers in her local neighbourhood, alcoholism is just endemic. You know, like it's just a given that sort of everyone is mired in alcohol, and there's no even attempt to pull themselves out of it, because it's just culturally appropriate for that group of people.
So clearly this is a novel that's dealing with some really heavy topics, but the impression that I'm getting from, you know, from all of you who've read the book is that it's immensely readable, and there's like a beautiful like thread of hope running through it as well. So I love that it's got that balance of, you know, literary achievement and brilliance, but also commercial appeal. Like,
yeah, I agree. I think it's topically tough, but reading it, I had no issue, even with, like we said, the dialect being quite Scotlandy. It was a really easy read, and which I think does really help when you're dealing with such tough topics. You know, nothing really is off limits in this book.
Yeah, I get accused by some members of Booktopia's team of always gravitating towards super depressing books. But a book like this, it sounds like it's going to be super depressing, right? Poverty, alcoholism, addiction. But overall, I find this book uplifting and hopeful, because Shuggie is just such a resilient kid. He struggles through, you know, not to mention the fact that, you know, which we haven't really touched on yet, he's growing up as a queer kid in Scotland, in this intensely macho environment. But all through it, he has this fantastic resilience and this strength to continue to improve his life, and this enduring love of his mother, that just, you finish the book feeling quite hopeful for Shuggie and for society and humankind, because, you know, if someone can endure all of that and still come out of it with a smile on their face, then there's hope for us all.
That's interesting. I finished the book and I personally was like, oh, this is quite hopeless. You know, I felt quite run down, and it's not until, you know, it's one of those stories that doesn't leave your mind. So I kept thinking about it, and my post-reading emotions didn't quite fit that immediate emotion of hopelessness. And that's when I realized, you know, yeah, like you said, Shuggie's perseverance, you know, is very hopeful in the face of all he endures, both at home and with, you know, the neighborhood and other kids his age. Plus, you know, I found myself, I guess, like people in that time, holding on to hope for more and hope for something different. You know, as I'm reading it, I'm just, like I think we said before, hopeful for Agnes. I was hopeful for her to get better, you know, to seek improvement. I was hopeful for Shuggie, you know, to come into his own and kind of feel better in himself and his life. And I think that's what's carried through afterwards. It's just I maintained that hope that the characters themselves had.
Well, the good news there is that, you know, I think Douglas has has acknowledged that Shuggie is kind of a little bit Dougie, and that, you know, he went on to become a fashion designer in New York, write a book, win the Booker Prize. You know, he certainly has come a long way from that very different kid in Glasgow.
There's something like almost Dickensian about, and I can't remember which review it was or which publication it was in, but it called it neo-Dickensian.
Yeah.
And it really does sound like, you know, a Great Expectations Pip story, but there's no like kind of horrible sense of like, you know, this kid made it out, so you all should too, as we've said. And there's like it sounds like there's a real authenticity about it, you know, like the dialect makes sense, whereas sometimes when an author writes in a dialect that they don't or like writes with an accent, you know, it's one of the most cringeworthy, awful things you could ever read. So I'm glad that there's that thread of authenticity and hope coming through.
Yeah.
I think we're overdue for some at the end of this year.
So we don't want to go on for too much longer, but I kind of just want to, I know it's early days, but we've had a few hours since it was announced. What's the response been like from readers and I guess customers? Have we seen an uptick in the book? Is it trending? Like,
it's got the little flame on our
it
has a little flame on our website, which means lots of people are clicking on it and buying it. I've been onto the publisher all morning trying to organize stock, so it's always a very busy day when the book gets announced in the UK overnight. And you know, it's a very early morning, and I'll be very excited to see how it continues to go over the next few days. It's also been really exciting to see, I'll add to that, as a little insider bookseller perspective, that for Booktopia sales, the whole shortlist has really had a lift on last year in terms of the uptick in the titles following their listing, which is great to see, given the debut and outsider nature of these authors and their books. Maybe it was the X factor of they all managed to beat Hilary Mantel, which gave it a big rubber stamp of approval. I certainly think there's nothing more I need to hear than a panel of very qualified judges saying that these 6 books are better than Hilary Mantel. You can read them, and I'll go buy those.
Absolutely. And I think that we do always see that big uptick when it's debut authors, because it's like from knowing nothing to having this huge rubber stamp on things.
They were talking to different previous winners of the prize at the start of the ceremony, and one of them over a live stream was Kazuo Ishiguro, who's one of my favorite authors of all time, and he was discussing he was contrasting winning the Booker with winning the Nobel Prize, and how very differently both prizes are treated. But he was also he was suggesting that there's a kind of a 4th level to a Booker win, or the Booker sort of process. You know, there's the long list, the short list, the eventual win. But then he alluded to a kind of 4th stage in which the book goes out into the wider audience and becomes like an international bestseller. And, you know, out of that, some books go on to become, you know, generational landmark novels, and some of them sell very well and then sort of fade away into the wayside. And it's he says, you know, the next challenge for the authors is to come and to celebrate this moment and to look forward to, you know, trying to achieve that next step. So I'm excited to see how the book goes in months and years to come.
Absolutely, and I'm you know, I've heard that that Douglas is writing novel number 2, and I will be awaiting that with bated breath. You know, hopefully this is the beginning of a great literary talent. I hope we hear a lot more from Douglas Stuart.
Yeah. I don't want to keep us all here for too much longer. So before we wrap up, final thoughts on Shuggie Bain?
Read it.
Yep.
I think
it's great.
Yeah, like if you've ever wondered what it's like to be a queer child in Scotland in the 80s, even if you haven't, I think you need to read the book. You know, as Ash said, it's a book that changes you, and it's a book that you need to read to understand the world better.
No, I was just going to say, I would recommend it for even your next book club or something like that, because personally there's so many things to unpack. You know, I didn't even discuss every single relationship in this book is so complicated. I could spend an hour discussing the intricacies of that. I think this book is a lot more than it appears to be. And I think it's well worth your time to discover it.
Fair enough. Can't get higher praise than that. Thank you all for joining me today to chat about this wonderful book. It's currently sitting in my cart. I haven't checked out yet, but I think I definitely will, because I want to read this, and I'm sure that everyone listening at home will want to read this too. So if that's you, you can order your copy of Shuggie Bain from booktopia.com.au, and thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free, and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast, and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.